Hi everyone. My name is Gaurav Upreti, and today the topic of discussion would be, or maybe a presentation that I've prepared, is around the 8 content migration pitfalls that we can avoid. And these are something that we have learned down the line doing a lot of migration projects. So this migration talks more around content migration rather than the larger data migration that may be there on enterprise projects, but rather in a website revamp or a digital experience platform revamp where there are a lot of content being moved from one application to the another or one system to the another when they are doing or they are within the journey of the revamp, right? So this overall session will talk more into those particular migration scenarios, pitfalls, and what are the lessons that we have learned down the line on these particular areas. So without doing any further delay, let's move ahead. First of all, I'll give a brief introduction about myself. My name is Gaurav Upreti. I am working as a product manager with Icreon. So overall, I have more than 12 years of experience in the IT industry itself. I started as working as a business analyst only in the profile and been growing in the same profile itself, and have been associated with my current organization called Icreon for more than 7 years now. And overall, in the Sitecore ecosystem, I've started working when I joined Icreon. So within a year of joining Icreon, I started working on this Sitecore ecosystem. And then more than 12 projects I've already worked on with the organization on Sitecore. And I am currently holding XM Cloud and CDP as well as personalized CDP and personalized certifications. And currently, I'm based out of New York City. And our company's office is also based out in New York City, which is the head office. So I'm working from New York City itself. And if you want, you can reach out to me on the email ID, which is gaurav.upreti@icron.com, and my LinkedIn ID is also available, right? So now let's move into the overall scenario. So we'll be talking about on the agenda side, what is the content migration process that we are talking about in this scenario or in as part of this presentation. What are the common pitfalls that are there, which we can avoid, which we have learned down the line doing all those work that we have as part of the projects. Then some case studies or real scenarios where we did find something which was useful in getting those pitfalls avoided or like mitigated, and then some lessons that we have learned down the line and what is the conclusion around this. So the overall scenario what we are talking about today is mostly in the world of digital experience platform. There are different things going on. There are systems like XM Cloud coming where you have dynamic modules, and then you have rapid development going around Next.js and other front-end technologies, headless, and all these things going on. But also, there is a process which has been there around since the start, which is data migration, because any system, when you talk about any systems revamp, any digital experience platform revamp, you need to be aware that there is some or the other data that would need to be migrated. And mainly in those kind of systems, it's like the content, which is a priority, where you may have a content in terms of metadata, in terms of the page details, the body content, as well as some documents or some artifacts that belong to that particular application. So what is the content migration process in this regards is what we'll talk about, and why it is important to have a content migration overall strategy and what strategy we have enabled by far, which has been working out for us, right? So let's go with the process. So overall, what the content migration process in this scenario that we are talking about is the process of moving content from one or more legacy systems. It may be a CMS, it may be other CRMs or other systems where you have some data regarding a website or regarding any user, and then moving that data to a new revamped system for which the organization is working towards getting their digital experience or their presence more in a better way, described in a better way, marketed better, and have a better scalable system to be available. And then the process will usually involve the content from a source CMS or a source content source to a destination or the end user source, which will be the new digital experience platform or new platform which will enable the particular website, such as Sitecore that we have worked towards. A lot of companies are working on Sitecore products where either they are migrating from lower Sitecore versions to the upper versions, or they are doing from any other CMS to Sitecore. So this is the process that we are talking about in this scenario, which purely is describing the content migration. We are not talking about any large enterprise data in terms of the cards or any financial data or something like that. We're just purely talking about the content in this scenario. Moving forward, so after the content migration, what it is in this scenario, we will be now talking about what is the content migration strategy and what are the steps that we have looked into till now, and what are the steps that we have followed for doing any content migration. So eventually in the content migration strategy, there are multiple steps involved. One of them is identifying the source or the data source, right? Eventually what that means is wherever you currently have the data of your application, we need to identify all those sources. It may be one single source or multiple sources where the current application data resides. And we need to ensure that we are not missing out any of the sources, so that when we do the data migration, we have smooth transition from one application to another without any exceptions, any issues, any problems down the line. So that's the plan overall. And then we also need to analyze the sources, because we need to understand how those sources are connected to their application right now, how those sources are set up, what is the data type and all those things, right? And then which relates to the next step, which is identifying the volume and type, which is directly related to identifying the sources and analyzing them. So as part of the analysis of the overall source, we identify what is the volume of data. It may be multiple data types, multiple data elements. Like one of the website may just have simple pages, and those pages are like home, about, and their contact page. But some of the application may have different things like artifacts, webinars. They are also showcasing insights. They also have other case studies and all those things. So they can be different type of data sources, and they can be a different volume of data. So identifying those data volume and type is as necessary as identifying the sources, because those data volume will provide us a whole soul idea on what data we are looking at, what kind of data resides in the current system, and how we can work on those data types to ensure we have quality maintained, right? So again, the next step that comes into the account is content quality. So when we are analyzing the different type of sources and then we are identifying their volume and type, we also need to ensure that what is the quality of the current content. So maybe some of the content that we have currently on the site may not be a very good quality content. Then there comes the thought where we rewrite the data, rewrite the content. So content writing is again an aspect that we think about during the migration process. Some of the content we may think about migrating one to one, and some of the content we may think about rewriting it. So that is where we need to understand what data is current, up to date, and can be utilized, and what data is outdated, obsolete, which we need to ignore and rewrite it. So those are the things that we need to look at in the content quality. Then after we have analyzed all these things, the sources, the volume type, as well as the quality, now we need to ensure that we are mapping that content correctly, right? So whenever you are doing content migration, there is a source and destination, or multiple sources and destinations. We need to have one-to-one mapping between each element. So think of it like in Sitecore, you are migrating one page content to another page in Sitecore now, which is a new system. So getting that page into Sitecore, you'll think about a page where you have page metadata, and then you can also think of it like multiple components on that page, and then data from one page is coming to different components. So you need to have one-to-one and proper mapping with those component fields from the source data fields, so that you have a smooth transition or smooth migration of data from the one source system to the another destination system, right? So these are the things that we have as part of the content mapping. After we are done with the mapping, we also need to think about transforming or transformation of data. Transformation of data, why it is needed or why it is necessary is because most of the times you'll see older application used to have everything into one single RT field, kind of a body field where you dump all that data in the older CMS or older systems. But now moving forward, we have more modular component structured, or page has more granular structure in terms of different components. So in that sense, we need to understand what is the current data, how it is set up, and if those data have some like some scripting, some HTML, or some other scripting languages. So those need to be transformed into a simple plain text. In order to get that conversion, we need to have the transformation step so that we can ensure that all the data that is coming up to the new site is not conflicting it with the website in terms of font, in terms of the styling, in terms of HTML, all those things. So it is necessary to transform the data before you're getting it to the new system, right? And also, when you're doing the transformation, keep a backup of that data so that in case something goes wrong, or in case the data gets lost in between, or if there is any corruption in between, we can have that backup ready to provide us the backup copy to enable it again on the site if needed. And then the last step would be migrating the data, which is more around getting all the data that we have, mapping, and after the mapping, when we are running the manual migration or script-based migration or different type of migration techniques that we can utilize, or if we are doing the manually migrating the content, or concurrent sessions are going through, or if there is a script running in background which is migrating the content from one system to another. So in that step, again, we need to ensure that there is a particular strategy behind what kind of method to use. Is it a big bang method, like we are doing one time migration and everything is up? That usually is something where we have a staging environment and then we're pushing it live later on. But eventually on systems which are already live, it makes more sense around having a strategy where we have a phased kind of increment, or a incremental kind of migration, where whatever data needs to go as part of MVP, that data or that content we can migrate. So eventually, these are the steps that we have involved. And at the end, you can see one continuous review and testing, which is something which we enable, or we ensure that it is part of each of these steps, not just a step in between, but the overall guideline in between all these steps is that you continuously review all the steps, all the artifacts, all the data that we have in between, and also perform testing at whatever level needed, so that we, if there is any issue or any potential issues that might lead up to failures, we can identify those during the entire process, not just at the end. Because most of the migration fail at the end when we realize that there was some corruption or some data issues or some source left out or some data missed out. So we need to ensure that is happening during our review, that we are identifying those things. So this is the overall content migration strategy that we have been ensuring and using in order to do the content migration. Now, we'll move forward to the next topic, which is the content migration pitfalls. So after doing all these content migration steps and performing the content migration, there are some of the pitfalls that we have identified, which are like basic in nature, but are essential to understand what can lead to a problem in content migration, and avoiding those pitfalls would be a necessary step. Moving forward, these are some of the content migration pitfalls, which is 8 in our case, that we are saying as basic, but something to look for. And I'll move one by one to each of them and provide some perspective on what we understand from them. So one of them is understanding the scope of work. So eventually, first step whenever you do any project, any dev work, anything from any project perspective, content creation, anything, you need to understand what is the scope of work, what are the things that are applicable, or what are the work that are applicable as part of that particular scope. So determining the scope is very crucial in particularly in the success of migration or content migration, because whenever we are doing the scope of work, we need to understand the basics, or the basic elements or basic pillars which need to be reviewed and which need to be converted from one system to another, or moved from one system to another. And usually underestimating is one of the big problem that we have in different projects, where we underestimate the migration work. Eventually, not sure if you have worked in the teams, but the mindset of any dev team or any team which is working on different artifacts usually thinks, okay, let's do the development first. Let's start the development first. We'll think about the migration within the journey or somewhere near the end. But that's where we underestimate the overall thing or overall work, because when we are doing the actual migration, we kind of find a lot of loopholes or a lot of data issues or a lot of things that we did not identify at the starting because we were thinking we'll do it at the end, or the client or the end users do not have understanding of their data fully, or they do not let us know fully what is the overall perspective. So it is very essential to estimate the work and as well as understand the overall scope of work at the starting or during the initial phase of the projects. And essentially, to avoid this pitfall, we need to understand all the elements which are involved in the content migration, which may be the sources that we talked about during the step, sources, the complexity of data, the data type, the data volume, and so on. So these kind of things we need to understand from the scope of work perspective, right? So this is one of the pitfalls, and avoiding it would be understanding it in depth and trying to figure out all the work items that are part of the particular work from data migration. Then moving to the next step is something around planning. So whenever we are done with the estimation and understanding the scope, we need to plan it. And again, data migration does not have proper planning sometimes. And if we are not planning the migration work efficiently, then again, it is bound to have issues. So in this particular scenario, not planning the migration efficiently is again another pitfall. And what we mean by that is whenever you have a lot of content to be migrated on a project, we do not do a well thought plan sometimes where we are thinking, okay, it's content migration from place A to place B without looking at the complexities, the type, the different situations that arise, or the overall estimate from the time perspective. We just think of, okay, moving from data from one place to another, that's it. So that is where we go wrong. So there can be different gaps in the overall data, there can be gaps in the result at the end, and those not planning those, and also not planning something which we call as fallback plan or rollback plan is again another pitfall. And to avoid it, it is essential that we plan different aspects including rollback, as well as if things go right, things go wrong, all the planning is there, and we have a smoother transition from one system to another. And if something goes wrong, we have a smoother transition to go back to the original state, so that we do not have a longer wait time, or the site is not down, or the web application is not down, which considerably will lead to a loss in revenue as well as loss in engagement, right? So that is the second pitfall that we need to think about and keep in mind. Then moving forward, again, another pitfall that we have analyzed down the line is poor communication with the stakeholders. Again, when we talk about stakeholder communication, when we are talking on projects, it's essential that we understand and we communicate properly. Same ways, when we are doing any content migration project, it is essential to understand the needs of the customer, identify their content that needs to be migrated, because the stakeholders or the end users are the ones who are working with the overall data in the application, and who have been for example, the end customer content editors. Those are the people who are working day in day out on the content, so they understand the whole content scenario and the content world of their application. So it is essential to connect with them, and if any poor communication is there, we need to establish a proper communication channel so that all those stakeholders are properly thought with, they are consulted, and we are not having any gaps or any mismatches in expectation. And that's what usually happens if we have a improper channel. There are a lot of gaps. They think we are doing everything, but they don't provide us all the information, and sometimes they're assuming that we are looking at everything, because eventually if the one of the organization is providing a project, their thought is we are looking from all aspects, but our thought is something different, because the scope that we determined may not have every element that they are looking at. So those kind of nits and grits will come out when we have a proper communication channel. And in order to avoid the pitfall of communication gap, we need to have a proper communication channel all time active with the stakeholders from the starting of the project itself, which only not only talks about development work or design work, but also the content migration work. And they need to be like involved in every step when we are identifying, when we are delivering, or we are doing the end testing. Everywhere they should be like involved, and they need to be aware of all the goals and objectives that we are trying to achieve, all the plans that we have created around the migration work, and all the resources that we are trying to migrate. So they should have all in all out information on all these aspects to have a proper communication and to have a proper understanding. So these are the some of the pitfalls that we talked about. Now the next or the fourth item is gaps in content mapping and structuring. So as we were talking about, usually what we have is when we are doing the mapping, we need to ensure that everything is working properly. And when we are working with the content migration, usually what happens is the content mapping and structuring will become a crucial success factor, right? If we have a proper mapping and everything is mapped properly, the data will flow essentially from one system to another, and we will have the right mapping, and it will be essential for the success. However, in some of the cases, what happens is the structuring may not be done very diligently, and the content migration leads to a lot of issues. What it means is, like, we may have one data field in one system, but which may be flowing into three different places in the other application, but we do not do all those three mapping, we just do one mapping. And at the end, we realize that this information should have been broken into three different elements, but eventually we ended up doing the same kind of one-to-one mapping, which may lead to an issue down the line. So for example, one of the application may have users name, their designation, their bio in one single field. But in the new system, we might end up making those three different fields, because in some of the places we might be showing their profile with only their image and their title and name, but at some places we might be showing their title, name, as well as their bio description. So that is where it becomes essential to do the right kind of mapping and the right kind of structuring as needed. And again, to avoid this pitfall, we need to correctly map each and every value or element that we are migrating from one system to another, and also maintain the structural entities intact. What I mean by that is, let's suppose there is one element which is a multi-line field. So we need to maintain that multi-line field structure in the new application as well, because they want to show it, or the design intends to have it a multi-line structure. If we are not using an RT, or maybe one of the fields may be a rich text editor in the old system, now when we are transitioning to the new system, we need to ensure those building blocks of that element, like the ampersand, the code of ampersand is moved around, not the whole soul HTML, because the design may have changed, but the values such as superscript, subscript may need to be retained. So those kind of things we need to understand and perform as part of the mapping. So these are the four pitfalls that we have come across, and we have identified the way to maybe avoid it, and maybe ignore not ignore it, but eventually if someone ignores them, then they may lead to a problematic content migration, and which may lead to a failure at the end down the line, right? So now moving forward to the next four set of pitfalls. So the next four pitfalls are, one of them is, or the fifth one is, not performing testing at each step of migration. So as I mentioned, overall, if we perform testing at each level, it becomes essential as part of the overall content migration, because there may be different amount of data, different volume, different sizes, different data types. Everything needs to be accounted for. And if we are just doing a one time round of analysis, but not another round of testing, it can lead to like something, or the information getting missed, and right amount of review is not done. That means something might be overlooked. So those kind of things can lead to failures or lead to quality issues down the line. So eventually what we are saying is, when we are performing testing at each step, it will lead to avoidance of this pitfall, as it will involve review and testing at each step or the milestone within the particular content migration. And there are proper checks will if we put proper checks in place, using automation or manual review techniques. Like during the migration, we may have some content which we are doing manually, some content which we are doing automatically. So also that way we can also have testing using automation scripts or using manual scripts, or how we are doing it manually using the test cases. That will become essential in performing the overall review, or uh, at every place doing the review will become essential for the overall success of the content migration. So that's another pitfall to avoid and look for. Then next one that we have is considering the quantity over quality. So again, one of the major reasons for failure in projects is everyone is thinking about we have to migrate the volume we have to migrate, but not the quality that we have to put into the new migration system, right? So eventually when we are migrating the content, there is large amount of data essentially in the older system, and we think about moving the whole large amount of data from one system to another within a set timeline. Within 2 3 days we have to migrate this 20 pages, 30 pages, 100 pages. That's the thought process. But essentially we are not also looking at, okay, there is also quality aspect, because if we are not doing the quality consideration, then the whole strategy around quality of the content may lead to failure. Because if we are not putting much quality into the aspect of strategy in this particular content migration, then at the end of the day when we do the migration, there may be quality issues, there may be uh, issues with the overall content that we have got, or there may be some content or some missed entities. So to avoid this particular pitfall, we need to always have quality as a precedence over the quantity, which means that whenever we are doing content, then we need to have quality as top priority overall. And the migration should be planned around the fact that no matter the quantity, quality should always be maintained, right? Even if we have hundreds of pages, we can do a phased migration. We can talk about doing an MVP where we have 20 pages per quarter or something of that sorts planned, rather than planning for everything at once place and then doing the testing and realizing that there are some missed entities, there are some quality issues or concerns. So it becomes again essential that we need to consider quality over quantity always when doing content migration. Now, moving forward, the next pitfall that we have identified is often in projects we are not prioritizing SEO elements such as metadata and redirects on the content migration. So again, what it means is whenever we are doing the overall data migration, there are different elements such as the search engine optimization related entities such as metadata of the page and the redirects of the page or within the content. And if we are not giving them due diligence or the due consideration, then the SEO elements can lead to, or issues with these elements can lead to lowered SEO rankings and loss of traffic, and it can also lead to engagement loss, right? So which in turn becomes a lower conversion rate and overall user experience is impacted as well, right? So ensuring that we have all the SEO data incorporated and there are no 404s coming on the website, we need to ensure that we avoid not prioritizing SEO elements, right? So, and to avoid this pitfall, we need to essentially preserve all the metadata elements and migrate the metadata elements, such as the title description of the project, the tags, the alt text of the images, and all these values. And in the current system, if there are any redirects for the existing pages going to any different site, or any of the site pages coming to a different page, all those redirects need to be maintained and move forward so that there are no 404s when we are done with the migration. And 404s definitely lead to loss of overall website rankings in terms of SEO, as well as the metadata if not present, or the alt text if not present will lead to the SEO issues. So we and the accessibility issues. So we need to ensure prioritizing these elements as such part of the content migration is essential, right? Now, the last pitfall that we'll talk about is ignoring post-migration audit and issue fixes. So again, now we talked about all the issues that may arise during the overall work of migration, but after the content migration also, we need to ensure that we need to we are performing the post migration audit if there to identify if there are any issues, challenges that are arising due to the migration that happened on the system. And if we are not doing all these activities, or if we are ignoring the post migration audit, then it will lead to issues with the rankings, with the validity, with the experience related items on the overall website, right? So again, to avoid this particular pitfall, we need to ensure that we are performing a due audit after the content migration has been done, and we already have predefined checklist of items against which we need to perform that audit. And post audit, we need to also make sure that if there are any issues that we have identified during the process, we need to prioritize them and fix them as soon as possible, so that all these issues can be mitigated, and the migration is a success. And we can also monitor the matrices such as in terms of content, such as the analytics and the optimization applications that we can utilize to understand how our content is faring against what we intended to do when we started doing the content migration, right? So these are the 8 pitfalls that we intended to talk about in today's session. And these 8 pitfalls have some issues arising up if we are not putting due diligence on each of them. So it is essential to put all well thought strategy behind these, and to avoid these is necessary, and it's something essential to do any content migration. Moving forward now we'll talk about some case studies we have encountered during doing the content migration. So one of the case study that I'll talk about now is the unaccounted redirect. So this is something essentially we did one of the migration where we realized that redirects were not set up properly or were missed. So essentially the client had not provided us the whole list of migrating redirects, and those were not something they were handling through their system but another system like Cloudflare. And in the new system, the intention was to have all the redirects as part of the content. So what happened was they were like they were like hundreds of blog pages, you can call them, or kind of a blog or insight content that we had in the old application. And overall in that application, the overall work was to identify the template, move the template to the new system, and migrate all those content. So there were 2 or 3 different templates to accommodate the content of insight, which was blog, webinar, and the event. So those 3 kind of templates were there, and we identified those templates and migrated data around them. But then we also realized that when we were doing those type of elements, there was also another template, or which was not a template but additional component that was added on some of the pages where they had put redirects, and those redirects they had not accounted for in the overall application somewhere, but they had just put those redirect elements or entities on those particular regex editor directly, and they had not provided us those guidelines like that we need to perform the migration of those redirects as well. And during the overall process, we it impacted the overall SEO. The impact was the on the SEO as well as the user experience, because when users started coming on the application, they started clicking on those regex editor fields. When they clicked on them, they were giving 404 errors, and eventually leading to users thinking the application doesn't work. And how we mitigated this was we went back to our overall URL mapping sheet, and we realized that we had mapped all the redirects, but not the redirects which were part of the templates which were custom built, like custom entities were added to the pages, or customer entities were added within the pages. So those then after getting those list of all the items, we initially started with all the items. Then we identified that some of the URLs that were giving 404 were not in that list. So we included those as part of the overall mapping sheet and included those elements, and then identified that those elements were missed out. And we identified the next redirect URL that will be in the new system, and put those URLs in over there as part of the redirects. So out of this, what we realized was the overall case study tells us that it is essential whenever you are doing a content migration, you need to maintain the URL mapping from an old system to a new system, because so again, as I talked about, the end users or the stakeholders are in a mindset where they know some of the things, but they may not be able to provide you everything handy. So some of the things you need to analyze yourself and also determine in reviewing and validating those sheets with them so that we can ensure 100% quality in the content migration. So that's one of the case studies. The next one I'll show you is again incident with data loss. So this again, as I talked about in the previous scenario, they were missed redirects. Same ways when we talk about the incident that happened with the data loss. So essentially, they were like different kind of templates in the website that we had accounted for in the application. But again, some of the templates they had created on the go and they removed it later on because those were not needed on the system because they were not creating multiple pages out of them, but essentially they had not maintained them as template but just a page entity, and they replicated different pages using the feature of copy and create a copy feature that Sitecore provides in the lower environment of Sitecore. And what they did was they moved those pages as packages to the production environment. And after we were doing the migration of their overall data, we realized that some of the pages or the content entities were missing. And when going back, we found out that some of the pages that were missing were not accounted for as part of the data migration because they had never mentioned those as part of the data migration strategy that we have built, because we were only talking about all the pages that are part of the templates, and the client had been agreeing on doing the migration of only the templated pages. But later on, we realized that some of the elements that were there overall in the content migration, some of the data elements were missed because of the fact that we did not account for pages which were not built using a standard uh, template out of Sitecore, but they were just a page built up manually and then used multiple times using copy feature of Sitecore, right? So that's something again, we understood that this is again a pitfall, and it is again necessary. How can we can avoid this kind of situation is it is necessary that we perform audit at each step from our side also, because client will provide us in descriptions but they will be limited in description, or there may be some stakeholders that are not available readily for with that information. So it is essential to do a due diligence from our side as well and do a proper content audit, because content audit, without a content audit you cannot perform a content migration smoothly, because down the line when you perform your audit you will realize that whatever the picture that we are seeing above the ground, there may be lot more things under the water like you have in an iceberg, right? So that's again another thing that we accounted for and we understood by the case study. So this is all from the case study perspective. Now we'll talk about some of the lessons that we have learned in the content migration. So there are 6 lessons that we have identified and listed here. There are many more, but something which we thought will be essential to talk about here. One of them is planning and preparation. So again, it is very essential when we are doing any content migration. One of the lesson learned would be always perform a proper planning and preparation for the migration. It is very crucial. It is not just development that is crucial in the success of a project, or not just UI which is crucial in success of a project, but also the backend migration, which is very crucial, because when you're moving data from one place to another, you need to ensure the quality, the quantity, and the expectations are met, again as you have in every other aspect of the project. So to perform any project successfully, always do due planning and preparation for it. Then the next one is stakeholder involvement. So as I mentioned, sometimes stakeholders are not keeping very actively on the projects, or you're not involving them actively on the project. So again, essential to keep the stakeholder involved at each step, and they should be involved from the starting of the project, not just when we are starting the content migration, but when we are thinking about doing the content migration or doing any analysis around it. So it is always essential or always necessary to provide them regular updates of whatever we are doing, wherever we are, so that if they have anything, anywhere they feel we are missing something or any information that we may be lacking, they may be able to help us out over there, right? So that's the another lesson. Then the next one is identifying the content that is there in scope. So again, when we are talking about the content migration, we need to identify all the content that is part of scope, because there may be hundreds of data pointers in the old system. But then again, for example, if we have thousands of blocks, not every block may be necessary to be like moved to the new system. So let the client know if they have any thoughts around moving only essential content. In one of the projects, for example, we did uh, consideration with the client on what data to be moved, and they agreed on moving all the data that was created after 2018, because before 2018 they were doing some different industry work or different industry aspect work, and then 2018 and beyond they started doing what they are actively doing currently. So they thought of letting go of the old content which is not relevant on their site anymore, and using only the content which is intended for the new audience which will be coming to their site, or a current audience who may be benefited from their content, which is actively making sense based on their business. So again, it is essential to understand the content which is there in scope. Then the data backup process is necessary. Again, a lesson learned that always keep a data backup, no matter it is a one page or one component data that you're moving through a package, or whatever strategy you may be leading for getting the data moved. Always keep a backup. You never know where things may go wrong. And if you don't have a backup, the old system is compromised as well as the new system is compromised. So always keep a backup copy where whatever you're doing, and essentially necessary to also, in case the data migration is successful but there is a corruption in data, in that sense also the backup copy will give you all the things that is essential for getting the data corrected, or data backup will provide you the flexibility to migrate the data again. So always keep data backup in process down the line for your content migration is another lesson learned. Then the another important lesson learned is testing is always the key, right? For any system you're building, anything you're doing on any application, testing will always be the savior. So if you are doing a large migration or a small migration, essential to keep your testing as a continuous effort rather than a one-time effort. So continuous effort throughout the migration step would be essential, and it would be a good practice to review the migration process at regular intervals so that you avoid any issues that may arise during the overall process or overall steps of migration. So testing is the key, and testing will always help out. That's another lesson learned. And the one of the lesson learned, again, the last one that we have in the list. There may be many more, but again, I'm emphasizing on the six because that's what I thought would be essential for this session. The next one would be prioritizing SEO and UX. So SEO, search engine work, as well as the user experience, again, a priority. Why? Because when we are performing data migration, there is metadata on the page, there is UI elements on the page which need to be migrated into the new system so that we are not losing into the core values of any website, which is the search engine optimization. So if the search engine is not ranking your page properly, that may be due to missing artifacts, missing data, missing metadata. Those are the things should not get impacted. If your page is doing well in the old application, it should continue to do well in the new application by making sure either you are migrating the data or you're creating the new data as per the new system if you are applying any changes. So make sure that all these elements are accounted for from an SEO side or a user experience side so that there is no impact on the overall application. So these are some of the lessons that we have learned down the line on content migration, and that's what we feel should be shared, and these will come handy in performing any data migration moving forward. So that's on the lessons learned. Now moving forward, as we reach to the end of the session, we'll talk about what the conclusion is. So from a conclusive perspective, it is very essential to understand one fact that content migration is not as easy as it may seem. This statement I'm putting it because usually we do not prioritize content migration as we do prioritize the sprints, the other work that we are doing around development or around UI. So it is essential that we provide the due diligence to content migration as well, what it deserves, because content migration is not as easy as it may seem. There are a lot many complexities, and when we are doing the initial review, you may find anomalies in their data, you may find anomalies in their process, and it is becomes essential that to start monitoring or analyzing or auditing the website, not just from a technical audit standpoint, but also from a content audit standpoint, which will make the lives easy when we are doing the actual migration. And by the time we reach at the goal of migrating the content, the step of migration, we will have ensured that all the anomalies in data, all the issues in data are like corrected, and we are ensuring that every data that we have is correct data and the right data for the application, right? And again, as I talked about, we should not prioritize this for a later time, and it should be as important deliverable as we have any other deliverable in any of the projects. So content migration needs to be planned with proper audits, proper checks and reviews, and we need to ensure that the overall scope of work is understood and mapped properly. And the common pitfall that we provide as part of this list can be created as a checklist, and we create a checklist of all the pitfalls or all the issues that may arise, or any important aspect within the content migration process should be checklisted, and those checklists should be checked against when we are doing performing the audit after migration, so that we are avoiding any issues, any delays, or any unnecessary noises at after the end of the content migration. So yeah, I would then conclude with saying thank you. And if you would like to connect with me anytime, you are happy to do that. Like you can connect with me over my email ID or LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to talk about any of the topics. So I'm not just working on as a product manager. I'm also doing a different aspect, like from a technical perspective, sometimes on projects, doing from the architectural side, and also looking at different aspects of the projects from UI perspective and other things. So if you need any help, any understanding, any discussions, I would happy to be part of that, because I love to be communicate with the whole community of Sitecore. I would love to happily provide any guidance possible.